All right. So with that being said, let's talk more about Wendt's argument in particular, right? What is Wendt's core thesis, and what does he mean by anarchy is what states make of it? Go ahead and just blurt it out. I can only see Kirsten right now, so if anybody has anything they want to say, just go ahead and say it.
Well, I guess just to kind of start it off, it seems that this theory has a lot more nuance to it. And I think that's a good thing. And so, when he says anarchy is what states make out of it, it kind of provides for that nuance. And one of the main points that he has within it is that like anarchy and power don't account for how people behave towards a friend or a foe. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, this theory provides a more nuance to where actions are kind of derived through interactions that people have. So I think that, part of his core thesis is that interactions are really crucial in kind of like formulating an identity. And then that identity then informs certain behaviors or perhaps even like policies of international relations then.
Anyone else want to add to what Parker said? Or detract from what Parker said? Or, engage with the prompt specifically?
One thing that I thought was interesting is Wendt like specifically addresses like liberalism and realism in his work. Mm-hmm. And so he presents, so like Parker said, he presents this idea of like anarchy is what states make of it, which is essentially that like identity should be a factor, identity of a state. And that mm-hmm. can be very, very specific down to individual social interactions, or that can be on a bigger level, such as like systems of social like functioning, hierarchy, what have you. Mm-hmm. And he argues that realism doesn't take into account these identities that states have. Because like in realism, we've seen like, it's more just like, well, this is just how it is. Mm-hmm. Like all states are gonna do this or that. But what Wendt is saying as well, maybe, like it might be true that some states are going to follow that, but some states might not, because the identity of each state is not equal. Because I mean, basically in this case, like identity could be a dependent variable. Mm-hmm. And so then for liberalism, he argues that it's more just observational, or just saying like, hey, like this happens, like all of these connections matter, but it doesn't like seek to explain it or to address like those bigger claims, or not claims, but bigger systems. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, like you could have like just a culture, or like, political party domination, like whatever, like those are bigger systems, for example, at least what mm-hmm. I would define as a bigger system.
Right. So there's an awareness, right, that unit level variables matter, right? Unit level actors matter, but also, structures matter, and these things are not sort of unconnected, right? That these things are connected by the mere fact that we give them their meanings, right? That without those meanings that we give them, they don't exist, right? And so individuals and structures sort of exist in tandem, and they are always sort of reifying or reinforcing each other, because institutions, as we're going to sort of talk about a little later, are basically just a collection of ideas, right? And ideas that we have fabricated, someone somewhere has sort of fabricated, and more people have sort of bought into the idea to where now it exists as a real thing that really has an impact on our day to day. Anyone else? Anything else?
Yeah. It seems like for his anarchy is what states make it, he's basically saying that the other theories that we've looked at so far kind of have the relationship backwards. That these other theories kind of argue that because there's this kind of overarching anarchy in international relations, that these states are naturally going to be kind of focused on their self-preservation and kind of balancing out power. But he says, that doesn't necessarily follow from having an anarchy. So it's probably more likely that, the anarchy that we see right now in theory is more caused by the processes that we've created and not necessarily the structure itself. So that relationship is backwards.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, because right, you don't have any sort of system, right? Any sort of identity. The system doesn't have an identity outside of interaction, right? Like you don't know, for instance, whether someone is a hostile actor just on face value, just because they exist in the same sort of world as you. You get to those ideas get learned through pattern interaction. If I see Jacob on the street and I make Jacob feel uncomfortable because I curse at him or I throw things at him or whatever, and I do that over and over again, well, then Jacob is gonna be wary of me, right? On the other hand, if Jacob sees me on the street and I'm always cheerful, hey Jacob, how are you, dude? How are you? Jacob's gonna feel comfortable around me, obviously. And so that's essentially what he's saying, right? Whereas realists, they come from the standpoint that, well, because there's no overarching state, right, to administer over countries, states have to be insecure at all times. They can't trust each other, right? And so it's better to be on the defense or on the offense in the case of offensive realism than to open yourself up to to abuse, or open yourself up to being attacked and so on and so forth, right? And so you're totally right. Like they are approaching this issue of anarchy and the I guess the priming effects of anarchy from a very sort of different perspective, right? And this is the point I made earlier, is that constructivists, especially Wendt, right, that tried to present his theory as if it were a middle ground, but actually what we see is that it's completely different from what liberals and realists argue, because for both liberals and realists, they take the premise that they come from the standpoint that anarchy is a threatening environment, right? Like anarchy is in fact very threatening. That's just the starting point that they both share. But and now the difference between realism and liberalism is that realists, they say, look, anarchy is always a condition, and it's always going to sort of condition states to be insecure or really defensive or be offensive. Liberalism says, yes, that's true, we accept that, but we can create institutions to sort of mitigate those effects a bit, not totally maybe dispel it, but sort of mitigate it. And constructivism says, look, we are making too much of this anarchy thing, right? Like anarchy doesn't automatically make actors act a certain way, right? Like it's the learned behaviors, like the interactions that they've had with each other. That is what determines how states interpret anarchy. So for some states, anarchy, does look like a realist take on anarchy, but others, it may be more friendly, right? More harmonious. And for others, they may just not have an opinion on the issue because they haven't had any sort of interaction with each other. You know what I mean? And so, and I think it was either Parker or Drew, or maybe this is something that sort of ran through all of the comments so far, is that, constructivism does provide a level of nuance that maybe the other theories that we've been introduced to so far don't really consider. Anyone else?
I would just say that like an example I think of this, let me know